"Don't worry," he said softly in Arabic, smiling as he leaned back. "She'll sign it. By the time she realizes her firm will be nothing but a footnote." The woman across from him nodded, unaware. The waitress froze mid-pour. The words weren't vague. They weren't business jargon. They were a confession. Her fingers tightened around the glass as he continued boasting, mocking, dismantling a partnership in a language he believed made him invisible. He never looked at her. He didn't know that every lie, every trap, every insult was being heard perfectly, and that in a few minutes, his secret language would become the weapon that ended him. The air in Aurelia was thick with the scent of money and truffle oil. It was a place where conversations were kept at a hushed reverence, and the clinking of Christopher silverware against Bernador porcelain was the only acceptable percussion. For Ila Al-Jam, it was just another Tuesday night. Her movements were a study in practice efficiency, a ghost in a crisp black uniform, refilling water glasses, clearing plates, and maintaining a professional invisibility that was the hallmark of five-star service. Ila was 24, but her eyes held a quiet wisdom that made her seem older. Most patrons saw a simple waitress, someone whose aspirations likely ended at the restaurant's heavy oak doors. They didn't see the woman who spent her mornings volunteering at a refugee center, translating legal documents for families lost in a new world. They didn't know that the soft cadence of her English was one of 5 languages she spoke fluently, Arabic being the first language of her heart. Her late father, Dr. Afarid al-Jamil, had been a celebrated historian and diplomat, a man who taught her that language was a bridge, not a wall. He had raised her in Amman, Jordan, amidst the scent of cardamom and ancient texts. He would tell her, "Lila, to understand a person's tongue is to understand their soul. Use it for kindness." Now, with her father gone and her mother's medical bills piling up, those bridges were a memory, and her linguistic skills paid for groceries through tips left by people who would never know her name. Tonight's prize table was Table 7, nestled in a velvet-draped alcove. It was occupied by Adrian Thorne. Even if you didn't know his name, you knew his type. His suit was a custom-tailored Tom Ford. His watch, a Patek Philippe Nautilus that cost more than Layla's college tuition. He radiated a predatory energy, a restless arrogance that made the air around him feel charged. He was the CEO of Thorne Global, a real estate leviathan that bought and sold skylines. Across from him sat Isabelle Renault, a stark contrast to Adrienne's sharp edges. She was an architect of international renown, her style elegant and understated. Her firm, Renault Designs, was celebrated for its sustainable and humane approach to urban development. She had a warm, intelligent face, but tonight it was clouded with a subtle tension that Ila noticed as she poured their water. They were partners on the biggest project of their careers, the Helios Tower in Dubai, a revolutionary skyscraper set to redefine the city's horizon. The revised schematics are flawless. Adrienne Isabel was saying, her voice a smooth alto. The solar panel integration is seamless, and we're projecting a 40% reduction in energy consumption. Adrienne waved a dismissive hand, not even looking at the tablet she offered. "Details, Isabel. I trust your team. Let's talk about the final profit share. My investors are getting antsy. We agreed on 60-40. Isabel stated, her brow furrowing slightly. "Your capital, my design, and intellectual property. That was the foundation of our partnership." "The foundation can shift," Adrian said with a slick smile. He leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Markets change. Risks evolve. We need to be flexible." Ila approached to take their order, her notepad ready. Adrian didn't even acknowledge her presence. He looked at Isabel and, with a conspiratorial smirk, switched to Arabic. The sudden shift in language was like a key turning in a lock inside Ila's mind. "Let's not bore the help with the real numbers," he said, in a smooth Levantine dialect. His accent was good, clearly learned from expensive tutors, but it lacked the soul her father's voice had carried. It was a tool, nothing more. Isabel gave a confused, polite smile. "Adrian, you know, I don't speak Arabic. Just coordinating with my Dubai office, my dear." He lied smoothly in English. Then back to Arabic, his voice laced with contempt. He continued to an imaginary person on the phone he wasn't holding. This woman thinks her pretty drawings are worth 40%. She has no idea I've already structured the deal to dilute her shares to less than 10. Her signature is on the preliminary agreement. The fool! Illa's hand froze for a fraction of a second over her notepad. Her blood ran cold. The casual cruelty, the blatant deception. It was a desecration of the language her father had taught her to use for honor and connection. She looked at Isabel's trusting face, then back at Adrian's smug, self-satisfied smirk. He had just called her a fool to her face, using the beautiful, intricate tapestry of Arabic as a cloak for his venom. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs. Mr. Dubois, the restaurant manager, had one rule: never ever engage with the guests beyond the script of service. Intervening would mean losing her job, the job she desperately needed. But her father's words echoed in her ears. Use it for kindness. Use it for truth. Adrian was still speaking his words, weaving a net of lies around the unsuspecting woman across from him, and Illa, the invisible waitress, was the only one in the world who could see the threads. Illa's mind raced as she retreated from the table, having taken their orders on autopilot. The scent of roasted duck and saffron risotto from the kitchen did nothing to quell the nausea rising in her throat. She stood near the service station, polishing a wine glass that was already immaculate, her eyes fixed on table 7. Adrian and Isabel had transitioned back to English, their conversation now a hollow performance. Adrian was charming, effusive, praising Isabel's vision for the Helios Tower. "Your work is poetry in steel and glass, my dear," he said, raising his glass of Merlot. "To our success?" Isabel, seemingly reassured, smiled and clinked her glass against his. "To Helios?" She agreed, though the worry hadn't entirely vanished from her eyes. Illa watched the charade, feeling like an unwilling spectator to a slow-motion crime. Adrian's Arabic words were seared into her memory. This woman, the fool, he wasn't just planning to cheat a business partner. He was reeing in the deception, enjoying the power of his secret knowledge. The language her father cherished, the language of poets and scholars, was being used as a vulgar weapon of arrogance. She remembered long afternoons in their sun-drenched library in Ammon, her father reading Al-Mutanabi's poetry aloud. He would explain how every word had layers of meaning, how the structure could convey strength, the vowels sorrow. He taught her that the language was a sacred trust. Seeing it wielded so cynically by a man like Adrian Thorne felt like a personal violation. The first course arrived. Illa carried the plates of seared scallops to their table, her expression a perfect mask of serene neutrality. As she set Isabel's plate down, Adrian leaned back and once again switched to Arabic, this time speaking to his partner as if she were a child. "Eat up, my dear architect," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "You must keep your strength. It is not easy carrying the weight of my genius on your shoulders." Isabel looked at him, catching the tone, if not the words. "What was that?" "Just admiring the presentation." Adrian lied, gesturing at the food. "They do beautiful work here." He then looked directly at Illa, a dismissive flick of his eyes, and continued in Arabic, assuming she was no different from a piece of furniture. "Look at this one. Probably lives in a tiny box in Queens. I could buy her entire life with the money I spend on wine in a month, and she has no idea she's standing in the presence of the man who will own the Dubai sky." Illa's knuckles were white as she gripped the edge of her serving tray. It took every ounce of her professional training not to flinch, not to let the burning fury show on her face. He wasn't just insulting her. He was erasing her, reducing her to a stereotype defined by his own obscene wealth. He saw her uniform, not the person inside it. She retreated again, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. This was worse than she thought. It wasn't just about business. It was about a deep-seated contempt Adrian Thorne held for everyone he considered beneath him, which it seemed was everyone. She caught her reflection in the polished glass of a wine cabinet, a tired-looking young woman in a cheap uniform. For a moment she saw what Adrian saw. Doubt crept in. Who was she to challenge a man like that? He could crush her without a second thought. He could have her blacklisted from every restaurant in the city. Her mother's health was fragile. She couldn't afford to be jobless. She busied herself at the service station, her hands trembling slightly as she folded napkins. Maria, another waitress, came up beside her. "You okay, Lay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Illa whispered, her voice tight. Just a long night, but it wasn't a ghost she had seen. It was a monster, one dressed in a $1,000 suit and speaking in a stolen tongue. The main courses were ready. As Illa picked up the plates, a felon for Adrian, a pan-seared branzino for Isabel. She knew she was walking toward a crossroads. She could continue to be the invisible waitress, the silent witness to a gross injustice, and secure her meager paycheck. Or she could honor her father's memory, speak the truth, and face the consequences. As she approached the table, Adrian was in the middle of a particularly vicious Arabic diet tribe, emboldened by Isabel's ignorance and Illa's perceived insignificance. "The final contracts are being drawn up by my team in Zurich," he was saying, smiling benignly at Isabel. "She'll be asked to sign them next week. The clauses are buried so deep, her lawyers would need a microscope to find them. By the time the tower is complete, her firm will be nothing more than a footnote, a hired hand, and the best part, she will thank me for the opportunity." He laughed, a low, guttural sound that made Illa's skin crawl. That was it. That was the breaking point. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about destroying a woman's life's work, her reputation, her legacy, and laughing about it over dinner. Illa stood at the edge of the table, the heavy plates in her hands. The entire restaurant seemed to fade into a blur. The only things in focus were Adrian's sneering face and Isabel's anxious one. She took a slow, deep breath, centered herself, and made her decision. She would not be invisible tonight. Placing the plates on the table, Illa's movements were deliberate, imbued with a newfound gravity. The porcelain made a soft, definitive sound against the linen tablecloth. Adrian Thorne didn't even look up, continuing his venomous monologue in Arabic as he reached for his wineglass. "I'm even thinking of renaming the tower," he mused, a cruel glint in his eye. "The Helios Tower is too collaborative. Thorne Pinnacle has a much better ring to it, a monument to my singular vision." Isabel, sensing the shift in his tone again, placed her fork down. "Adrian, what are you talking about? You seem distracted. Is everything all right with the project?" "Everything is perfect, my dear," he answered in English, patting her hand condescendingly, just running through the final branding strategy. "All good things." He then glanced at Illa, who was still standing by the table, not retreating as she should have. An annoyed frown flickered across his face. "Is there something you need?" he asked, his tone sharp, dismissive. This was her moment, the point of no return. The entire restaurant, with its hushed conversations and clinking glasses, seemed to hold its breath. Illa's heart pounded a fierce rhythm, but her voice when she spoke was shockingly calm. It was a voice that carried the quiet authority of her father, the weight of his legacy. She looked not at Adrienne, but directly at Isabelle Renaud. Her gaze was steady, empathetic. "Mom," she began, her English clear and precise. "Mr. Thorne's branding strategy is perhaps more detailed than you realize." Adrian's head snapped up. His eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. "What did you say?" He hissed, the charm vanishing to reveal the viper beneath. Isabel looked from Illa to Adrian, her confusion mounting. What is she talking about? Illa kept her focus on Isabel, refusing to be intimidated by Adrian's glare. "A moment ago, Mr. Thorne was discussing the final contracts your firm will be signing next week. He mentioned that there are clauses buried very deeply. Clauses designed to significantly dilute your firm's shares and ownership of the project upon completion." Silence. A thick, heavy blanket of it fell over their alcove. Isabel's face went pale, the color draining from her cheeks. She stared at Illa, then at Adrian, her mind struggling to process the words. Adrian slammed his wineglass down on the table. Red wine sloshed over the rim, staining the pristine white tablecloth like a splash of blood. "That is an outrageous lie," He snarled, his voice a low growl that turned heads at nearby tables. "You're fired. Get out of my sight before I have you thrown out." He turned to Isabel, forcing a laugh that sounded like grinding glass. "Can you believe the nerve? This waitress probably trying to extort us. It's pathetic." But Isabel wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were locked on. She saw no malice, no greed in the young woman's expression. She saw only a quiet, resolute sincerity. "Is that true?" Isabel asked Illa, her voice barely a whisper. "Did he say that?" "Yes, Mom," Illa said softly. "And that's not all." She took another deep breath, the Arabic words feeling like stones in her mouth. She had to give them voice. She had to expose the truth. He also expressed his intention to rename the building. Illa continued, her voice gaining strength. "He feels the Helios Tower is too collaborative. He prefers Thorn Pinnacle to reflect what he calls his singular vision." The specific detail, so bizarre and egotistical, struck Isabel like a physical blow. It was the kind of petty, arrogant detail that felt horrifyingly true. She visibly flinched. Adrian shot up from his chair, his face a mask of purple fury. "Security!" he bellowed, his voice echoing through the now silent dining room. "Get this insolent little liar out of here, Mr. Dubois." The manager was already rushing over his face, a mixture of panic and professional dismay. "Mr. the Thorn." "Sir, I'm so sorry." "What seems to be the problem?" "The problem," Adrian spat, pointing a trembling finger at Illa, "is that your staff is delusional and slanderous. I will not only have her fired, I will sue this restaurant into oblivion." But before Mr. Dubois could stammer an apology, Illa did the one thing Adrian Thorn could never have anticipated. She looked him directly in the eye and switched to perfect, unaccented Arabic. "You called her a fool," Illa said, her voice ringing with clarity and power. "You boasted that she would thank you for the opportunity to be ruined by you. You use my language, the language of my father, as a shield for your corruption. But you are mistaken, Mr. Thorn. It is not a shield tonight. It is a mirror, and everyone can see exactly what you are." Adrian froze. His jaw went slack. The color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly, chalky white. For a man who built his empire on control, on being 10 steps ahead of everyone else, the shock of being confronted and exposed in his own secret language rendered him utterly speechless. He stared at Illa as if she were an apparition. The source of his power suddenly turned against him. In that moment, she was no longer a waitress. She was the arbiter of a truth he thought was safely buried, and the fallout was just beginning. The silence that followed Illa's Arabic declaration was more profound than the loudest explosion. Every diner in Aurelia was now openly staring, their forks paused mid-air. The only sound was the faint, panicked breathing of the manager, Mr. Dubois. Adrian Thorn, for the first time in what was likely decades, was completely and utterly paralyzed. The confident smirk, the predatory glare, the aura of untouchable power, it all evaporated, leaving behind a man looking hollowed out and profoundly exposed. He stared at Illa, his mouth opening and closing silently like a fish gasping for air. He had been outmaneuvered in his own private game, exposed by a pawn he hadn't even deemed worthy of notice. But the real detonation happened across the table. Isabelle Renaud had been watching, her expression a maelstrom of confusion, betrayal, and dawning horror. She didn't understand Illa's final words, but she understood Adrian's reaction perfectly. She understood the language of guilt. She rose from her chair, her movement slow and deliberate, as if moving through water. Her eyes, which had been filled with hurt, now hardened into something that looked like forged steel. "Translate," she commanded, her voice low and dangerous. "Translate what you just said to him." Illa held Isabel's gaze, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. She took a breath and repeated her statement in English, her voice steady and clear for the entire room to hear. "I told him that he had called you a fool, that he boasted you would thank him for the privilege of being ruined. I told him that he used my father's language as a shield for his corruption, but that tonight it would be a mirror showing everyone exactly what he is. A collective gasp rippled through the restaurant. Mr. Dubois looked as if he was about to faint. Isabel absorbed the words, each one landing like a hammer blow. The final puzzle piece clicked into place. The strange condescension, the dismissiveness, the sudden switch to a language she couldn't understand. It was all part of a monstrous, calculated deception. Her partnership, her project, her trust. All of it had been a lie. She turned her gaze back to Adrian. Her voice, when she spoke, was devoid of all warmth, all history. It was the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. Thorn Pinnacle. She said the words, tasting like poison. Your singular vision. Is that what this has all been about, one grand monument to your ego? Adrian finally found his voice, but it was a pathetic sputtering wreck. Isabel, listen to me. This is a misunderstanding. This girl is lying. She's trying to cause trouble. Is she? Isabel countered, taking a step closer. Then, why do you look like you've just seen your own ghost, Adrian? I've known you for 3 years. I know when you're lying. Your left eye twitches. It's twitching now. He instinctively raised a hand to his eye, a gesture of pure, unadulterated guilt that sealed his fate. Isabel let out a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. The contract's the ones in Zurich, of course. You thought I was just some pretty artist who didn't understand the numbers. You thought I was a fool. She picked up her wineglass, not the one Adrian had spilled, but her own. She held it up, the deep red liquid catching the light. Our partnership is over, Adrian, effective immediately. You will be hearing from my legal team, not just from my firm's lawyers, from every litigator I can find in New York, Paris, and Dubai. We are going to examine every contract, every email, every document you have ever touched. I am going to put your singular vision under a microscope. With that, she didn't throw the wine in his face. It would have been too theatrical, too cliché. Instead, she calmly, deliberately upended the glass onto the center of the table. The red wine bled into the white linen, swallowing the stain Adrian had made, creating a vast, dark pool that seeped toward his plate. It was a final symbolic ruin of their shared venture. She turned to Illa, her expression softening for a fraction of a second. Thank you, she said, the words heavy with unspoken meaning. Then, without another glance at the man she once called her partner, Isabel Renaud turned and walked out of Aurelia, her posture erect, her dignity a shield around her. The entire restaurant watched her go. Then all eyes turned back to Adrian Thorne, who stood frozen amidst the wreckage of his dinner and his empire. Humiliation, hot and potent, washed over him. He was no longer a titan. He was just a man exposed and shamed in a room full of his peers. His rage, having nowhere else to go, finally found its target. He whirled on Illa, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. He seethed. You are finished. You will never work in this city again. Mr. Dubois, finally spurred to action, stepped between them. Miss Alger, he said, his voice trembling, please come with me. You're dismissed. Illa looked at Adrian Thorne one last time, at the sputtering, impotent fury of a bully who had finally been stood up to. She felt no fear. She felt no regret. She simply nodded to her manager and walked away from the table, leaving the billionaire to stew in the truth he had tried so hard to hide. She might have lost her job, but she had found something far more valuable, her voice. The manager's office was a small, cluttered space that smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. The door closed behind Illa with a soft click, shutting out the charged atmosphere of the dining room. Mr. Dubois, a man whose life revolved around maintaining a seamless veneer of perfection, looked utterly unraveled. He paced back and forth, running a hand through his thinning hair. Illa, what were you thinking? He began, his voice a mixture of anger and despair. Adrian Thorne is one of our most important patrons. He's on the board of the hospitality group that owns this restaurant. Do you have any idea what you've done? I told the truth, Mr. Dubois. Illa said quietly, her hands folded calmly in her lap. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving a profound and weary clarity. The truth, he scoffed, throwing his hands up in the air. This isn't a court of law. This is a restaurant. Our job is to provide an experience and escape not to arbitrate truths. You've brought a scandal to my floor. You've humiliated a powerful man. He could ruin us. He will certainly ruin you. Ila met his frantic gaze without flinching. He was ruining a good person. He was using a language I hold sacred to do it. Sometimes the truth is more important than the experience. Mr. Dubois stopped pacing and sank into his chair, looking defeated. He sighed heavily. Lila, I like you. You're one of my best. You're always on time. You never complain. You handle the most difficult customers with grace. But I have no choice. My hands are tied. Thorne has already called his contact on the board. I have to let you go. You're terminated effective immediately. I understand, she said, and the simple acceptance in her voice seemed to surprise him. There were no tears, no pleading. You'll have to sign some paperwork, he mumbled, shuffling through papers on his desk. Standard termination agreement for cause insubordination and inappropriate conduct with a guest. As he prepared the documents, Ila's mind drifted. She thought about her small apartment, the rent check due next week. She thought about her mother's prescription, the one that cost a small fortune each month. A knot of fear tightened in her stomach, cold and heavy. Had she been reckless? Had she sacrificed her family's security for a moment of righteous indignation? But then she remembered the look on Adrian Thorne's face, the utter shock of being seen for what he truly was. She remembered the quiet strength in Isabelle Renault's eyes as she walked out. No, it wasn't reckless. It was necessary. It was the only thing she could have done, and still be able to look at herself in the mirror. It was what her father would have wanted. She signed the papers, her signature firm and clear. She gathered her few belongings from her locker in the staff room, a well-worn copy of Naguib Mahfouz's palace. A photo of her parents smiling in the desert sun, and her spare apron. The other staff members averted their eyes, whispering amongst themselves. Maria gave her a quick, sympathetic squeeze on the arm, but no one wanted to be seen associating with the woman who had brought the wrath of a billionaire down on their workplace. Walking out of Aurelia's grand entrance and into the cool night air of New York felt surreal. Just an hour ago, she had been a part of its gilded world, an invisible cog in a machine of luxury. Now she was an outcast, standing on the pavement as taxis whizzed by, just another unemployed person in a city of millions. She started the long walk to the subway station, the city lights blurring around her. The fear was real now, a constant nagging whisper in her ear. What would she do? How would she explain this to her mother? She was so lost in her thoughts that she almost didn't hear the sleek black town car pull up beside her. The back window glided down with a soft hum. Layla Al-Jam. Ila turned, her heart skipping a beat. Sitting in the plush leather interior of the car was Isabelle Renault. Her face was pale in the glow of the streetlights, but her expression was composed and resolute. "Get in," Isabelle said. It wasn't a request. Hesitantly, Isla opened the door and slid into the seat opposite her. The interior smelled of expensive leather and Isabelle's subtle jasmine-scented perfume. The car pulled away from the curb, gliding silently into the river of traffic. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. Isabelle simply studied Ila, her intelligent eyes taking in every detail. "What you did back there," Isabelle said, finally, her voice soft but firm, "was the bravest thing I have ever witnessed. You lost your job for me. I did what I felt was right," Ila replied, her voice a little shaky. "Integrity like that is rare," Isabelle stated, "especially in my world and Adrian's. He thrives on the assumption that everyone is either too scared or too greedy to challenge him. He never counted on someone like you." She paused, leaning forward slightly. "He was right about one thing. You were fired. I made a call to a friend on the board of the hospitality group as soon as I got in the car. Adrienne had already been screaming down the phone at him. They were terrified of the legal repercussions. Firing you was their attempt to appease him." Ila's heart sank. So it was final, irrevocable. But Isabelle continued, a new sharp light in her eyes. "That just means you're available for a new opportunity. I'm going to need help. I'm going to need people I can trust implicitly, people with unique skills. She looked directly at Illa. Your fluency in Arabic is not just a skill, it's a gift. And your character? That is priceless. I'm not offering you a job as a waitress, Layla. I'm offering you a position as my personal translator and consultant. I need you to help me go through every document, every contract, every piece of correspondence related to the Helios project. I need you to be my mirror, just as you were his. Illa was stunned into silence, a consultant for Isabelle Renault. It was a lifeline she could never have imagined. The pay will be more than enough to cover your mother's medical bills and then some, Isabelle added, as if reading her mind. But I need your absolute commitment. We are going to war with Adrian Thorne, and we are going to win. The fear that had been gripping Illa just moments before began to recede, replaced by a surge of adrenaline of purpose. This was it. This was the bridge her father always spoke of. She was being asked to use her language not just for kindness, but for justice. Yes, Illa said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, I'll do it. Isabelle smiled, a true, genuine smile this time. It transformed her face. Good, she said, because our work starts now. The next 2 weeks were a blur of caffeine, legal documents, and the quiet, intense hum of Isabelle Renault's temporary war room. She had leased a discreet office suite in the Sieg building, a minimalist space with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city Adrian Thorne thought he owned. The team was small and elite Isabelle Leah and 2 of the sharpest corporate litigators in the country, a formidable duo named David Chen and Evelyn Reed. For Illa, it was like stepping into another dimension. One day, she was clearing plates and calculating tips. The next, she was a key player in a multi-billion-dollar corporate battle. Initially, she felt a dizzying sense of imposter syndrome, but Isabelle would have none of it. Illa, your perspective is the most valuable one in this room, she stated on the first day. You see past the jargon. You understand the nuance. You are our secret weapon. Layla's primary task was to analyze every document that had an Arabic component. Adrian, in his arrogance, had conducted a significant portion of his dealings with his Dubai-based investors and contractors in their native language, creating a paper trail he believed was opaque to his American partner. He had been wrong. Illa sat at a large conference table, a stack of contracts in front of her, her laptop open to a translation software. She used only for cross-referencing terminology. Her real work was done in her head, where the rhythms and subtleties of the language lived. She wasn't just translating words, she was interpreting intent. The first breakthrough came from a series of emails between Adrian and the primary construction contractor in Dubai. In the English versions forwarded to Isabelle, the emails were straightforward, discussing material costs and timelines. But the original Arabic threads, which Adrian's office had carelessly included deep in an unzipped file, told a different story. Isabelle, look at this, Illa said, her voice tight with focus. She pointed to a line on her screen. The English email says they're agreeing to use premium locally sourced steel as per your sustainable design mandate. Yes, that was a major point of negotiation, Isabelle confirmed, leaning over her shoulder. Well, in the Arabic original, Illa continued. Adrian gives a different instruction. He uses the phrase al-hadid al-ijari. A literal translation would be commercial-grade steel. But in this context, it implies the cheapest possible option that will pass basic inspection. He's telling them to use inferior materials to cut costs while billing you and the project for the premium grade. David Chen, the lead lawyer, whistled softly. That's fraud, plain and simple. He's not just cheating you. He's compromising the structural integrity of the entire building. The discovery sent a jolt of grim energy through the team. This wasn't just about diluting shares anymore. It was about criminal negligence and endangerment. Day after day, Illa dug deeper, her father's lessons guiding her. She remembered him explaining how in Arabic, the placement of a single word could alter the entire obligation of a contract. Adrian, for all his expensive tutors, understood the vocabulary of business, but not the soul of the language. He made mistakes, small, arrogant mistakes. The smoking gun appeared late one night, fueled by stale coffee and takeout pizza. It was the Master Partnership Agreement, a massive document with parallel text in English and Arabic. The English section, scrutinized by Isabel's previous legal team, seemed ironclad, confirming the 60-40 split. But Illa's eyes were drawn to a specific Arabic clause in an appendix she suspected no one on Isabel's side had ever bothered to properly translate. It was dense, filled with convoluted legal phrasing. Adrian had likely counted on it being dismissed as a standard regional boilerplate. Illa read it once, then twice, her heart beginning to pound. It was a contingency clause. It stated that in the event of any unforeseen market fluctuations or significant project redesigns initiated by the architectural partner, a deliberately vague and subjective phrase, the capital investor Adrian would have the unilateral right to restructure the ownership shares to protect the primary investment. It gave him the legal cover to do exactly what he had boasted about in the restaurant, gut Isabel's stake in the company under a flimsy pretext. The phrase for initiated by was mubadara min, which could also be interpreted as stemming from or related to making almost any change she made a potential trigger for the clause. He built the trap right into the foundation of the company. Illa whispered, the audacity of it taking her breath away, and any change an architect makes during a project of this scale could be twisted to fit that definition. Isabel said, her voice dangerously quiet as she read Illa's English translation. A window is moved, a material is updated. He could claim any of it was a significant redesign. It's a corporate poison pill, Evelyn Reed added, her eyes gleaming with a lawyer's predatory excitement, and he hid it in plain sight. They now had a clear pattern of deception, fraudulent material orders, a deliberately malicious contract clause, and Adrienne's own boastful confession, which Layla had witnessed. They had the sword, the shield, and the motive. As they compiled the evidence into a damning portfolio, Illa felt a profound shift within herself. The timid waitress was gone. In her place was a confident, skilled professional who understood her own worth. She was no longer just wielding her father's language. She was embodying his principles. Isabel noticed the change. My father was an architect too, she told Illa one evening as they looked out over the city lights. He always said that a building's strength isn't in its height, but in its foundation. You, Layla, have uncovered the rot in Adriana's foundation. Now, we just have to watch it all come down. The final piece of their strategy was to arrange a meeting, not in a courtroom, but in a boardroom. They sent a formal request to the board of Thorn Global for an emergency meeting regarding the Helios Tower project. Adrian, believing Isabel was coming with her hat in hand to beg for scraps, readily agreed. He wanted a public execution. He had no idea he was walking into his own. The Thorn Global boardroom was on the 80th floor of a skyscraper that bore his name. It was a cathedral of corporate power designed to intimidate. A colossal mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine, reflected the steely New York skyline. At the head of it sat Adrian Thorn, flanked by his team of smuggle-looking executives and lawyers. He looked rested, confident, and utterly convinced of his own victory. He believed Isabel was crawling back, weakened, and ready to negotiate a pathetic severance. When the doors opened, it was not a defeated woman who walked in, but a queen arriving to hold court. Isabel Renault entered poised and radiating an icy calm. Behind her were her lawyers, David Chen and Evelyn Reed, carrying briefcases filled with evidence. And beside her, walking with a quiet confidence that made her seem inches taller, was Illa Alge. Adriana's eyes flickered to Illa, and a sneer twisted his lips. "Really, Isabel," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You brought the help. I hope she's here to serve coffee." A few of his executives snickered. The board members, a collection of stern-faced men and women who represented the old money behind Thor Global, looked on impassively. Isabel ignored him completely, addressing the head of the board, a silver-haired man named Mr. Harrington. "Thank you for convening this meeting on such short notice. I have come to present evidence of gross misconduct, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty by your CEO, Mr. Thorne, in relation to the Helios Tower project." A murmur went through the room. Adrian's sneer faltered, replaced by a look of annoyance. "This is a pathetic last-ditch effort to smear my name, Isabel. You have no proof of anything." "On the contrary," David Chen interjected, his voice sharp and clear. "We have a great deal of proof." He began systematically and dispassionately to lay out their case. He started with the compromised building materials, presenting the side-by-side emails in English and Arabic, with Layla's certified translations projected onto a large screen for everyone to see. He explained the financial and safety implications of using substandard steel in a skyscraper. The board members began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, their impassive masks starting to crack. Next, Evelyn Reed took over, dissecting the master partnership agreement. She projected the innocuous-looking English clause and then the venomous Arabic one beside it. And then she turned to Illa. Miss Alge Evelyn said, her voice echoing in the silent room. "Could you please explain the nuance of the Arabic phrasing for the board?" All eyes turned to Illa. Adrian glared at her, his eyes burning with hate. For a fleeting second, the memory of his dismissive wave in the restaurant flashed in her mind. But she was not that person anymore. She stood and faced the board, her voice clear and unwavering. "Of course," she began. "The English translation of the clause is intentionally misleading. The Arabic original uses the term mubadara min to describe the trigger for the ownership restructure. While it can mean initiated by, as Mr. Thorne's lawyers would likely argue, its broader connotation is stemming from or related to. This ambiguity is deliberate. It creates a loophole wide enough to allow Mr. Thorne to claim that any minor adjustment, any creative decision made by Ms. Renaud throughout the entire design process is grounds to seize control of her shares. It is, in legal and linguistic terms, a trap." She then explained the cultural context, how in formal Arabic contracts precision is paramount, and such a deliberately ambiguous phrase would be seen as an act of bad faith. She spoke with an authority that left no room for doubt. She wasn't just a translator. She was an expert. Adrian Thorne was on his feet. His face flushed. "This is absurd. She's a waitress. What would she know about contract law?" "She knows the language your contracts were written in," Adrian Isabel said coolly, "which is more than your own board seems to know." Mr. Harrington, the chairman, finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. "Mr. Thorne, is this true? Did you authorize this clause?" "It's a standard protective clause," Adrian blustered. But his defense was weak, his confidence shattered. The evidence was too precise, too damning. The final blow came from Isabel herself. She stood and looked directly at Adrian, her voice ringing with the memory of his betrayal. "And then there is the matter of Mr. Thorne's confession. She said she recounted the scene at Aurelia. She described how he had switched to Arabic to conceal his intentions, and then she looked at Illa. Miss Alge was there. Isabel stated she heard everything. She is a direct witness to Mr. Thorne boasting of his plan to dilute my shares to less than 10%, to rename the tower after himself, and to leave my firm as a mere footnote. She heard him call me a fool." Illa met the gaze of every single person in the room. "It is all true," she said softly. "I heard every word." The room fell into a stunned, tomb-like silence. They had clear, documented evidence of financial fraud and a malicious contract corroborated by the first-hand testimony of a credible witness who had just demonstrated her unimpeachable expertise. Adrian Thorne looked around the table at the stony faces of the board members, at the disgusted look from Mr. Harrington, at the triumphant, steely gaze of Isabel. He saw no allies, no escape routes. He was trapped. The language he had used as a weapon had been turned back on him, and the waitress he had scorned had delivered the fatal thrust. His empire, built on a foundation of lies, was crumbling around him. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Adrian Thorne's blustering denials crumbled into pathetic silence under the weight of the evidence. The board members who valued their company's stock price and reputation far more than they valued their CEO's ego saw only one path forward. Mr. Harrington stood his face a grim mask of disappointment. Adrian, in light of this information, the board is asking for your immediate and unconditional resignation as CEO of Thorn Global. Resignation. Adrian choked out the word aghast. This is my company. I built it. You built it on a foundation we can no longer trust. Harrington retorted, his voice like chipping stone. Either you resign now quietly, or we will hold a public vote of no confidence and terminate your position for cause. The details presented here will become part of the public record. I imagine the SEC and the District Attorney's Office will be very interested. Your choice, checkmate. The fight drained out of Adrian Thorn. He slumped into his chair. A man utterly defeated, his legacy turning to ash before his eyes. The Titan had fallen not in a blaze of glory, but in a quiet, sterile boardroom, undone by his own arrogance and the courage of a woman he had deemed insignificant. As Adrian's lawyers hastily began to negotiate the terms of his surrender, Isabel, Leah, and their team stood and prepared to leave. As they walked towards the door, Adrian looked up, his eyes locking with Layla's. They were filled not with the fiery hatred of before, but with a hollow, bewildered resentment. He still couldn't comprehend how she, a nobody, had been the architect of his ruin. Ila met his gaze, and for the first time she felt a sliver of something akin to pity for him. He was a man so imprisoned by his own greed and prejudice that he couldn't see the humanity or the potential in anyone but himself. It was a sad, lonely way to exist. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of forgiveness, but of finality. And then she turned and walked out, leaving him to the ruins of his life. The news of Adrian Thorn's sudden resignation for personal reasons hit the financial world like a shockwave. Thorn Global stock plummeted. The Helios Tower project was thrown into chaos. But Isabel Renault was prepared. With Thorn out, the project's primary investors were panicking. Isabel, armed with her flawless reputation and the truth of Adrian's fraud, stepped into the void. She presented a new plan to the Dubai investors, a plan that not only restored her 40% ownership, but with new financing she had secured, gave her a controlling 50% stake. She was no longer just the architect. She was the developer. The project was hers. The first thing she did was officially and permanently register the name the Helios Tower. It would be a monument not to one man's ego, but to collaboration, integrity, and sustainable vision. A few months later, Layla stood with Isabel on a chartered flight to Dubai. Below them, the foundations of the Helios Tower were already taking shape, a testament to their victory. Illa was no longer Isabel's consultant. She was the newly appointed Director of International Communications for Renault Development, a title that came with a corner office, a handsome salary, and, most importantly, a profound sense of purpose. She had paid off all of her mother's medical debts. They had moved into a beautiful new apartment, and her mother, free from financial stress, was healthier and happier than she had been in years. Ila was also establishing a foundation in her father's name, a non-profit dedicated to providing free linguistic and legal support to immigrant and refugee families, a way to use her skills to build bridges for those who needed them most. As the plane began its descent, Isabel turned to her. "Do you ever think about him?" she asked quietly. Lila knew who she meant. The papers had been merciless. Adrian Thorn was a pariah, facing a mountain of lawsuits from shareholders and investors. His fortune was decimated, his name, synonymous with disgrace. He had lost everything. Sometimes Illa admitted, "I think about how easy it would have been to just walk away, to say nothing." "But you didn't," Isabel said, her hand resting briefly on Illa's arm. "You chose to speak. You reminded me that the strongest foundations aren't made of steel and concrete, but of truth." Illa looked out the window at the sprawling, glittering city below. She thought of her father and the lessons he had taught her in their quiet library so far away. He had told her that language was a bridge to understanding a person's soul. For Adrian Thorn, it had become a mirror to his corruption. But for her, and for Isabel, it had become the blueprint for a new future, one they were building together. Word by word, girder by girder, arising honorably into the sky. Layla Ojei's story is a powerful reminder that our greatest strengths can lie hidden, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. A skill she cherished as a connection to her late father became the key to unlocking justice. She proves that integrity is not determined by your job title or your bank account, but by the choices you make when no one is watching. Adrian Thorne believed his wealth and his secret language made him invincible, but he forgot that truth can be spoken in any tongue and courage needs no translation. This story shows that one person armed with the truth can indeed topple an empire built on lies. What did you think of Layla's incredible bravery? Let us know in the comments below. If this story of justice and empowerment moved you, please hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to see that courage can come from anywhere. And be sure to subscribe for more unforgettable stories. Thank you for listening.